Hi, everyone. I am Rebecca Brown Rice, and I'm the Director of Operations at the Louisville Healthcare CEO Council. My segment today is on killer experiments. But before my current role at the Council, I worked at U of L, helping to run a healthcare product development grant called Excite. And it was a program very similar to Kinetic in that funding was milestone driven, and the goal was to get healthcare products to market. And given that, one, we wanted to use those funds to make the biggest impacts we could in terms of technology development. And two, let's be honest, most healthcare-related technologies fail to make it to market. We were very focused on the idea that failing fast was a success. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. In short, a killer experiment is a question meant to kill a project before significant resources, that's your time, capital, blood, sweat, and tears, are directed into developing and perfecting something that ultimately won't work. It's finding out what the critical point that turns this technology or this project from something interesting, where an investor or a potential partner might say maybe, to one where they can say yes, definitely. And I'm personally so obsessed with this question in its various forms that it led me to learn about it from the corporate side, which for many of you, those corporate entities represent a necessary partner for technology development or an ultimate customer or acquirer of your technology or eventual company. So I'll get into the meat of killer experiments in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background and context from my current perspective. So, as I mentioned, I oversee operations at the Louisville Healthcare CEO Council, or LHCC. LHCC was formed in 2018 by the CEOs of some of the big healthcare companies with their headquarters in Louisville. Big names like Humana, Kindred, Passport, Signature, Anthem, and Norton and Baptist. They formed with the intention of using this concentration of strength in healthcare, particularly in the aging space, to increase economic vibrancy in the region while also solving some of their business challenges. The thing that most excites me about the council is that if you look at our company representation, as you can see here, you've really got every part of the continuum of care represented, from your acute care to your long-term care to hospice providers and the payers, and pretty much everything in between. And this line of sight across the continuum allows us to do some things that are really unprecedented. And I lead our corporate innovation efforts. So my work centers around understanding individual council company business challenges. This process looks a whole lot like what you heard from Maggie Galloway earlier about customer discovery, and she is the absolute Jedi master of customer discovery. So to do this, to apply this customer discovery in the corporate world, we gather together everyone that we call a stakeholder around a particular focus area. And this includes clinicians, program managers, C-suite folks, tech people, finance people, and we understand their daily points of friction. We ask them questions to better understand it. And we use that line of sight to uncover really complicated, complex industry pain points at the systems level. And that sounds really abstract, but if you know anything about the US healthcare system, you know it's complicated and that incentives are not always aligned in a way that makes the system efficient. How do we, from a systems level, start to unravel that? And I think that's part of our work at the council. To give you an example, this year we're tackling social determinants of health, which are all of those social needs that affect your overall health but aren't part of a medical treatment. Things like access to healthy food, transportation, and housing, and your level of understanding about your own healthcare needs. It's hard for you to manage your diabetes, for example, if you don't have a safe place to sleep at night or access to nutritious food. And when we talk to our providers, our skilled nursing facilities, and our hospitals, it turns out that they do some really innovative things to provide assistance to people with those needs, which improves their clinical outcomes, but they're sometimes quashed, those efforts, because they're unfortunately sometimes bad investments. They save money not for them, not the providers, but for the payer. And we've got a lot of those stories, and we're working on alternative ways to incentivize innovation, not only from within the system, but for external innovators like you. So identifying and understanding these gaps equips us to meaningfully engage the innovator community and deploy capital strategically. A global pandemic is a really sobering reminder that collective system-wide efforts like LHCC's are going to be critical in shaping what healthcare looks like in the future. And the reason I took this time to tell you all that is that LHCC is, in the coming weeks, releasing a call for innovations that address these social determinants. And you can look for that soon. That call for proposals or applications will be accompanied by a report that summarizes some of the most interesting findings we gathered from our customer discovery efforts. And we really wanted to make those challenges accessible to an audience of innovators. And I'll make sure it gets out to this group when it's released. Our timeline is a little up in the air right now, given the current state of the world, but stay tuned. So hopefully that gives you some context about why killer experiments are so important. The sooner you know something is not going to work, the more time and resources you have to find something that does. And that's the real purpose behind killer experiments. And again, a killer experiment is the question meant to end or kill a project before you've dumped a lot of time and resources into something that ultimately won't work. So one important thing about killer experiments is that they really are meant to get you to that next level. And most of the time, that next level or next step involves an infusion of cash, whether it be non-dilutive from a grant or from an angel investor or some other type of investor. So you've got to keep your audience in mind. Who are you trying to convince that this is something worth investing in? So the kinds of experiments that can be project ending can take many forms depending on where your project is in development. The best case scenario is that it ends during the customer discovery work. You find, for example, that the project you're working on doesn't address the real pain points you discovered during customer discovery. And if you're really focused on that problem, you'll need to pivot to find a solution that addresses those pain points. They can be in vitro, in vivo, preclinical, all the way to clinical. A lot of times these killer experiments continue past the time when the technology makes it to market. It's an ongoing process. And because if you're continually doing killer experiments, if your answers are always yes, that you continue with the product development, there's always another experiment on the horizon. You'll always have another stakeholder to convince. So in other words, and I apologize, you need to be a serial killer. So how do you think like a serial killer? One important part of this, and it's so important, are controls. And sometimes these aren't the same experimental controls that you would run if you were doing some peer-reviewed research. Not your standard positive and negative controls, although they may be part of the experiment. And to really find what industry experts look to in order to understand whether or not your results are meaningful, you have to get out and talk to them. What are your industry standards? Sometimes this actually requires, and it takes a little bit of a different way of thinking, but requires an external partner. Sometimes results from a third-party lab can be very convincing to a potential investor. So it's also really important to understand what your customers are using now to solve their problem. And this will come out in your customer discovery work. How much better than the current benchmark or gold standard does your product need to be in order to displace it? You know, if you've got a gold standard in the market that all clinicians are using right now, talk to clinicians and find out what will it take, what do I have to show in order for you to change your behavior and choose a different product. So sometimes this requires more customer discovery. In general, but not always, your killer experiment is not basic science. It is not exploratory. It is sometimes process-oriented, sometimes economics-oriented, and it may not be a piece of publishable science. So psychologically, this is difficult, but it's important, we found. Killing an experiment is a success, and that's really important to internalize. Luckily, you've got a lot of tools in your killer toolbox, and the first we've talked about a lot, and that's customer discovery. A lot of projects you can find from the very beginning are not quite exactly hitting those pain points on the head, and that's a good way, that's a good time to kill that project. The other immense resource you have are your kinetic staff and your technology managers. These experts have seen a lot of technology development stories. They've seen them from their beginning to their eventual death or success out in the market. And that gives them a lot of experience in terms of strategizing around your next step. Another resource I want to make sure you know about are the University of Louisville Entrepreneurs in Residence. This is a resource available through funding for the LEAP initiative, which LHCC is a founding member of. And these folks are entrepreneurs with multiple successes under their belts, and they understand the market and they understand what it takes to develop a technology. And they are just an amazing resource and sounding board for you as you design these killer experiments. And the other one that I really want to talk to you about is target product profiles. These are something that we deployed during the Excite program, and depending on whether your product is a therapeutic, a device, or a diagnostic, or something else, you can target one of these profiles. You can customize it for your own kind of product. And I really encourage you to reach out to your Kinetic staff members and get a copy of one of these templates, because working through it with someone like your tech manager or your Kinetic program manager or officer is very helpful in understanding the end result that you're looking for, and then in terms of your product, and allowing you to work backwards and plan your experimental timeline and roadmap so that it aligns with your the specifications that you need for your product to succeed. I know I'm coming up on the end of my time, and I really flew through that, so please, if you have any questions, send them to this email below, and the staff will make sure I get them, and thank you so much for your time.